Thank you and good morning, everybody. It's great to meet an old friend after some 35 years, so we'll catch up after this. Thanks, everybody, for having me here. The point around banking in specific, before I just start speaking about banking, everything I say about the healthcare industry is not as a practitioner, right? So you have to admit that at best I'm an odd patient or people who I've taken who've not had health issues. And so let me try and give you my perspective through that lens. Firstly, banking has either by design or by forces of nature been an avid adopter of technology and quite early at that. If you go back to the 70s when the uh, literally started moving from writing your daily ledgers to what then was called ledger posting machines. And so banking system has moved over phases to adopting technology. And today, almost there's nothing that you can't do on this device, right? I mean, everything that happens can be done on a handheld device. If we were to look at that and compare it to medicine, probably, or healthcare, probably there's a lot of work left on that count. And yesterday I was looking at some data. Technology spend in the financial service industry is almost 4x of what it is in the healthcare industry. So that speaks to the fact that the technology intervention or invasion into financial services is an order of magnitude many times over what happens in, say, healthcare. Now, specific to banks like us, we had the choice of scaling up using more brick and mortar or using more technology. Right? In an era where more and more people are getting familiar with using devices and self-service and visiting physically, walking into a branch, it would be probably foolhardy to try and expand and become the next SBI. No point putting up 25,000 branches and the attendant costs and control related issues versus using technology to bring it to a place where you can do when you want, where you want, how you want. So as a bank, we chose a mantra which served us quite well, I believe: digital at the fore and human at the core. Not to forget that at the end of it, everything is relating to a human being. Nobody wants to be treated like a sort of a data point or a machine. You need that personalized humane touch, but you'd still like to do a lot of stuff on your own self-service at a time when you want, where you want. So I think banking and some banks in particular have used or adopted technology much more wisely, I would add, and tried to make sure that the experience is both instant gratification as much as it is keeping in mind that you still need that warmth and touch and feel of an institution because you're dealing with money. And no different for healthcare, right? I mean, healthcare at the end of the day is probably anything more than money is probably the fact that you need to keep well. So I think adoption of technology in banking, and particularly in the more recent years, everybody is hearing about fintech and the impact of fintech in banks. Uh, I don't know how much each of you are personally using those capabilities, but if you look at the ability to open an account today than it was even 5 years back, as we are sitting in this meeting and you're listening to us or otherwise looking at your phone, through a few clicks, you could you could be opening a bank account. Now, there is an inherent learning in that. Is not that it is easy to open, but what made it easy to open is the whole ecosystem has developed around it. You may have heard of something called a jam trinity: Jandan, Aadhaar, and mobile. Now, these look like as though they are disparate events, right? Aadhaar looks like just a unique identity, but when you cut back and look at what it has done to transform how people can today interact or open an account and then further interact, the level of interoperability that has come, the level of conveniences that have opened up by the use of technology, and not very in your face, these have fundamentally transformed. And I think any industry, whether it's banking, healthcare, aviation, whichever the industry, the forces at play in terms of what a customer needs, technology, the supportive regulation, and early adoption, that combine whoever absorbs it better, I think can produce solutions that are of immense value and can be fundamental and transformational. I'll park here. I'm sure there will be issues and questions that you may want to talk about.
Suresh, first question is automatically guaranteed towards you, but I'll give you a little bit of time to build up. So, guys in the audience, please start thinking about some good questions because I've got some fantastic expertise here that is not common. This is the opportunity to learn from the best of the best in their industries. And I think if you can think about some of the insights that are there, sir. Bijoy, Bijoy, why don't you go first?
Is it on? Oh, wonderful. The biggest concern in the banking sector in India is that I do not know how safe is my money. And I want to understand from you that after great deal of negotiation with the government, we were able to insure our deposits from 1 lakh to 5 lakhs. But what happens to the people who have deposits more than 5 lakhs? And how do we ensure and assure the depositor that the money is safe in the banking industry?
Great question, sir. Firstly, I don't know which bank you bank with. If it's Federal Bank, your money is safe.
In my career.
Right?
Federal Bank Jamshedpur was my first bank
Oh, I'm
where
pleased.
I started with.
I'm pleased and delighted.
But
to
I
hear.
now continue with Bank of Baroda.
Yeah.
And of course,
Anyway, we won't go there. You started well. I hope you continue to do that, right? But I think the point you make, sir, is money safe with the banking system? I'm yet to come across somebody who's lost money from a formally regulated, scheduled commercial bank. There have been stories which all of us have heard, but people who have played on the fringes. So history tells us that the banking system hasn't failed. Yes, there have been banks have failed. Banks have done practices which unfortunately may have been out of rigor, out of what driven by individual or that group of people who had some misplaced intentions. So I would speak for the banking system. There is no instance of people having lost money for a range of reasons. I think deposit guarantee is only one of it, right? If you take the banking system over the years, where it was largely say public sector held, and over the last few years maybe the ratio of public private has changed, but nevertheless, the well-run banks who have capital or capitalize themselves have good practices, and the regulations in India don't allow you to do crazy stuff. And if you do crazy stuff, the RBI intervenes quite early to make sure that the customer doesn't go through any odd pace. So my sort of confident advice.
My only reaction is it made me wake up when the depositors of PMC Bank,
Yes.
which was well regulated by RBI,
No.
went into a kind
No,
of a
it was
chaotic
not.
condition.
That's what it is. It was not regulated by RBI. That's where the catch is.
But I thought they had
Nah.
enough insight into the working of the bank.
No,
But
that-
I don't want to get into the working
Bijoy,
of.
let's have
Yeah.
that as a separate conversation.
But you can rest assured that the banking system is robust and banks are, sort of extremely both regulated and I would say prudent to deal with it. And there will always be an odd man out or an odd bank out. I would think the consumer is well advised to do some kind of discretion, not just to be, sort of sold by glamour.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I think it's a good thing you didn't ask about the healthcare industry. So clearly you trust all your doctors and hospitals.
My turn is in the next session.
Okay. We'll have some spice. Come.
Yeah, Dr. Vishnu Panikar from Fortis. You mentioned about that banking has 4 times adopted healthcare, IT than healthcare. And if you look back on how you all did
Speak up, we can barely hear.
and how you all did to get your workforce motivated to adopt it, because this is a challenge all of us will face. Because the journey has started, we are going in a big way to adopt IT into our systems in our workflow. What are the things that your advice that you have to us? What we should do to get better adoption?
No, I think great question. If you go back, even banking, for I think in the late 70s, early 80s, when computerization was becoming, sort of more prominent in banks, naturally there was huge resistance in the workforce. A fundamental belief being that I would lose my job or I will be displaced. That sentiment prevails. Even today, people think robots will take away our jobs, right? But I'll just give you a data point which may help you understand. Today, the banking system formally, directly, has a workforce of close to 12 to 13 lakh employees, or maybe a little more, depending on where you take the count. Let's say 15 lakh employees. 40 years back, it was a few lakh, I mean, less than 2 lakhs. So you could argue that that then was a misplaced belief that banking, more technology would mean less jobs. Not so. I'll speak for my own bank, right? We just started the financial year yesterday. My HR head has taken an approval to hire 1,000 people this year. And we, like Mr. Mehta pointed out, have been recognized for our application of technology and increasing the productivity using technology. But yet we are adding another 10% workforce each year. So I think the moment people realize that this is not an either or but an and situation, and therefore the leadership or the task of management is to convince it's not either or but it is and. It is technology and people. When I spoke about our mantra, I said it's digital at the fore, human at the core, right? We don't want to make a technology in such a way that it is displacing human beings, but it is enabling human beings, both as a customer and as a service provider. So I think it's experientially is where you can convince people that it is no longer an or situation, it's an and situation. But let's face it, if we don't do it in an organization and another person does it, you're out of the game anyway. So if any of our colleagues believe that they will resist for themselves in their team, but somebody else is going to do it. So you may as well do it or not, or lose the plot totally. So I think these we have to only demonstrate, empirically prove that these are no longer nice to do, but it's a survival game, and not doing it has consequences. And I think people realize that as time passes.
I think we can also take a great learning from another industry. If you rewind the clock, maybe 25, 30 years ago, how did pilots learn to fly planes? How did pilots learn to face unusual circumstances in the cockpit or in the plane when you have loss of pressure? They didn't go and practice on a plane, right? They went in. I mean, it
Simulators.
would be great to hear your insight on simulations.
Actually, the history of aviation is really not very rosy. It was fraught with lot many dangers, right from the uh, hot air balloon or helium aircrafts, and lot of casualties took place initially. We lost a lot of lives in initial stages of aviation. Uh, the I think the biggest casualty was the helium aircraft going from UK
He's
to
saying
USA.
Leventon.
We lost in one go around 200 people in 19th century, beginning of 19th century, and thereafter even the biplanes and all, they were inherently weak, unstable, with very rudimentary navigation and other aids. But now, fortunately, aircrafts are very robust with all the facilities, all the gadgets, very stable. Uh, Earlier on, there was no pressurization system. So nobody used to fly above 10,000 feet. All the aircraft, biplanes, everything used to fly below 10,000 feet. Flying below 10,000 feet is always risky because weather is there, turbulence, clouds. So it can, like small aircraft, these Dornier type aircraft, they fly less than 10,000. They chances of them meeting with accidents is very high, rather than our commercial airline which flies around 33, 36,000 feet, where there is no turbulence, no clouds, no weather phenomenon. So now technology has evolved, and basically it is the technology which has taken care of our problems. So it took about nearly 100 years to reach to this level.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marshall. I think we are now looking forward for the question from Mr. Suresh.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And Shyam, lovely to see you again. Um, so I have a related question to the previous one that was just asked. And this pertains to the adoption of technology per se in both these sectors, banking as well as in healthcare. And if you look at, you alluded to the 80s, the 70s, and the 80s, and if you think about the nationalized banks, how they were particularly reluctant to adopt technology and you talked about the fact that there was a fear of loss of jobs and so on and so forth. So if you think about what spurred the adoption of technology in the banking sector, uh, part one of my question is this related to the opening up to the private sector that actually spurred competition and therefore created the environment that would facilitate adoption of technology? And if so, what are the parallels for the healthcare industry, where typically, so it's, while we don't have the same kind of a situation in the healthcare industry, certainly one might argue that if the sector itself is growing rapidly, perhaps people don't feel the need to differentiate themselves using technology. So my question is, what are the conditions that can actually facilitate faster adoption of technology in the healthcare sector? Or were there conditions in the banking industry that specifically spurred it? And if so, are there things that we can foresee for the healthcare industry that might actually lead to it?
And great question, Suresh. My read is as follows. Uh, in most often in these things, something is a trigger and then something else catalyzes, and some ecosystem changes subsequently makes it, if you don't do it, you're out of the game. So I think there are three phases. If you go back, around the time we were all in campus, technology was beginning to make an impact, but not so materially. But there were, at that time, less the private sector or the private sectorization. It was more the the impact of foreign banks. And those foreign banks brought their stance in India, which they did not have scale. The only way they could scale up or make any impact was using technology, and that was their so called USP at that point in time. As that sort of caught on in a wave one, if you will, then that gave birth to the private sector birth in India in the early 90s. So the period mid 80s to mid 90s, it was the foreign banks which set the tone, and then the private sector banks which did, say, from 95 to 2005. This, if you take it 2 decade space, 85 to 25, these were the people who set the tone. Now, what happened is, because these two started making an impact, the core arm janta banking that was there in the early, say, late 90s, early 2000, felt they were out of the game. So I think one led to the other. First is a situation where a foreign player came and stimulated. Second, opening up of a sector which made the private sector banks uh, catch up fast using technology. And these two became condition precedent for public sector banks to catch up. So now I think one is, and it's, you're seeing a cycle repeat. Foreign banks are getting out of the system. So it's a very, I know I don't want to bother this crowd with these phases of banking, but if you cut back to your healthcare, you're going to learn similar things. The short point is, different sectors have different kind of growth horizons and different stimuli. But if you don't read those stimuli and believe that it is only a passing phase and it's for somebody else, I think we are calling trouble upon ourselves. So I do believe healthcare is already doing stuff, but evidently lot less, because when you look at statistics, it suggests that it's only a third or a fourth of the technology spend of a rival of another industry. So I think there's a lesson to learn and implement from there. I think I can see one hand go up there.
Yeah, it's just a related question because in the banking sector, the technology adoption was, the resistance was more because of loss of jobs. But I think in the healthcare sector, it's more of loss of personalization to some extent, both from the provider as well as the receiver. I mean, the patient as well as the provider. So what is your take on that? Because that seems to be the biggest hindrance.
Yeah, I think
that we have.
that conversation will continue for long, but I have a mantra for that, which is, the future of digital is human. if you look at it through the lens, technology then brings more human being at the fore. So technology will make it simpler that error rates will come down, but you don't lose the humanization. And I mean, this is a debate we can have for eternity, but I think we should not view technology as a substitute for human being or technology replacing human being. You should bring a paradigm where technology is humanizing more and helping becoming more human. Whether it's banking, healthcare, aviation, sector agnostic, that statement holds, is my view. And I hope time will prove that. Yeah.